Hello, learners. Welcome to today's online geography lesson. I'm delighted to have you join me as we explore one of the most fundamental concepts in geography, which is understanding how we locate places on our planet Earth. Today, we are diving into section 4, understanding the Earth's coordinates, and specifically we will be focusing on latitudes and longitudes. These are imaginary lines that form a global grid system, and they are absolutely essential for navigation, mapping, and understanding our world. By the end of this lesson, you will have a clear understanding of what latitudes are, how they work, and why they matter in our everyday lives. Whether you are planning a journey, studying climate patterns, or simply curious about how geographers pinpoint locations on Earth, this knowledge will serve you very well. So, let's begin this exciting journey together, and I hope you are ready for it. Okay, before we dive into the content, let me outline what you will achieve by the end of this lesson. These are your learning targets, and they will guide our exploration today. First, let's look at the curriculum framework. We are working within the strand of the Earth and its neighborhoods. This is a broad area of study that helps us understand the physical characteristics and systems of our planet. Within this strand, we are focusing on the substrand called the Earth and its features. And under that, we look at latitudes or parallels. This narrows our focus to the specific geographical features we are studying today. Our learning outcome is to explain latitudes and outline their significance to our everyday life. This means that by the end of this lesson, you should be able to not only define what latitudes are, but also articulate why they are important and how they affect us in real, tangible ways. Our learning indicator is to use latitudes, and later we look at longitudes to locate places on the Earth's surface. This is a practical skill. You will be able to take a set of coordinates and identify where on Earth that location is. Now, let me break down the specific objectives you accomplish today. By the end of this lesson, you will be able to 1. Define the term latitudes. Thus, you understand what latitudes are and the terminology associated with them. 2. Identify the important lines of latitudes on Earth. That is, you know the key latitudes and their locations such as the equator, the tropics, and the polar circles. 3. Outline the characteristics of latitudes, that you will understand the properties and features that define how latitudes work. And last but not least, state the usefulness of latitudes, which indicates that you'll be able to explain why latitudes matter and how they are applied in geography and in real life. Please keep these objectives in mind as we progress through the lesson. They will help you stay focused and ensure you are capturing the key concepts. Okay, let me expand on these learning objectives a bit further, as they form the foundation of what we are exploring today. When we talk about defining latitudes, we are not just memorizing a definition. We are developing a conceptual understanding of what these lines represent. Latitudes are not physical lines drawn on Earth. They are imaginary constructs that we use to create a coordinate system. This is an important direction. Identifying important lines of latitudes means you become familiar with the major latitudes that have geographical and climatic significance. These are not random lines. They mark important boundaries and zones on our planet. For example, the equator is not just any latitude. It is the reference point from which all other latitudes are measured. Then again, understanding the characteristics of latitude will help you see the patterns and rules that govern how these lines work. For instance, you will learn that latitudes run horizontally, that they are parallel to each other, and that they decrease in circumference as you move towards the poles. These characteristics are not arbitrary. They reflect the spherical nature of our Earth. And finally, stating the usefulness of latitudes connects these abstract concepts to real world applications. Latitudes help us calculate distances, determine climatic zones, understand seasonal variations, and locate places with precision. This is why geographers, navigators, climatologists, and many other professionals rely on latitudes every single day. So, as we move through this lesson, I encourage you to think critically about each of these objectives. Ask yourself, why does this matter? How does this connect to what I already know? How might I use this information in the future? This kind of reflective thinking will deepen your understanding and help you retain what you learn. Okay, so let's get to the heart of our lesson. What exactly are latitudes? Here is the formal definition. Latitudes are imaginary lines on the surface of the earth from west to east. I take it again. Latitudes are imaginary horizontal lines. You see, they are key words or key terms in the definition that you have to take key note. Imaginary horizontal lines drawn on the surface of the earth from west to east. Good. They measure the angular distance of a point on Earth's surface in degrees from the center of the earth north or south of the equator. Now let me break this down into digestible pieces. First, imaginary horizontal lines. These lines do not physically exist on Earth, and in geography we will learn a number of imaginary lines. Maybe you have heard of contour lines. Yes, it is imaginary. It is not physical that you can feel a touch of it. Okay, so you cannot touch them, you cannot see them. They are conceptual tools that we have created to help us navigate and understand our planet. Think of them like the grid on a piece of graph paper. They are there to help you measure and locate things, but they are not part of the paper itself. Second is drawn on the surface of the earth from west to east. This tells us the direction in which latitudes run. If you were to trace a line of latitude, you will move horizontally around the earth, going from west to east. This is important because it distinguishes latitude from longitudes, which run in a different direction. As I said earlier, we will explore that in our next lesson. The third is they measure the angular distance in degrees from the center of the earth north or south of the equator. This is the key to understanding how latitudes work. We measure distance in degrees, not in kilometers or miles. The measurement starts from the equator, which is our reference point, and extends northward to the North Pole or southward to the South Pole. The maximum distance is 90 degrees in each direction, whether north or south, with reference to the equator. Then the key term is parallel. Here's an important vocabulary term you need to know. Lines of latitudes are also called parallels because they run parallel to each other and never meet. Think of about parallel lines in geometry. They maintain the same distance from each other and never intersect. Lines of latitudes work the same way. No matter how far you travel along the earth, one latitude line will never ever cross another. This is a fundamental characteristic of the latitude system. Understanding this terminology is important because when you read geographical texts or listen to geographers discuss Earth's coordinate system, you will hear the term parallels used interchangeably with latitudes. Now, you know they mean the same thing. Okay, good. So, we continue with the definition of what latitudes are. Let me reinforce and expand on the definition we just explored because this is foundational knowledge. When we say latitudes are imaginary, we are emphasizing that they are human construct. It is man that has given birth to it. That is tools we have created to solve a practical problem. How do we precisely locate any point on Earth? Before latitudes and longitudes were developed, navigation was far more difficult and unreliable. When sailors want to locate a point, it wasn't easy. So, sailors and explorers had to rely on landmarks, stars, and then intuitions. The development of latitude-longitude system revolutionized navigation and geography. The equator as the reference point. Central to understanding latitudes is the concept of the equator. The equator is the starting point, that is the 0 point, from which all the latitude measurements begin. It is imaginary line that runs around the middle of the earth, dividing it into two equal halves, the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. From the equator, we measure northward and southward in degrees. A place that is 30 degrees north of the equator is said to be at 30 degrees north latitude. Okay, a place that is 45 degrees south of the equator is at 45 degrees north south latitude. The north and south designations tell us which hemisphere the location is in. Then the poles serve as the limits of the lines of latitude. The measurement of latitude extends from the equator, which is 0 degree, all the way to the North Pole, and the value of the North Pole is 90 degrees north, and the South Pole is 90 degrees south. These are the maximum points. You cannot go further north than the North Pole or further south than the South Pole. They mark the limits of the latitude. So the range of latitude measurement is from 0 degree to 90 degree in each direction. You ask why this matters. Understanding latitude is not just an academic exercise. Latitudes have profound implications for climate, weather patterns, vegetation, and human settlement. The latitude at which a place is located determines how much direct sunlight it receives, which in turn affects temperature, rainfall, and the types of plants and animals that can survive there. This is why tropical regions near the equator are hot and wet, while polar regions near the poles are cold and dry. As we continue through this lesson, you will see how latitudes connect to real world phenomena and why geographers consider them one of the most important tools in their discipline. The equator, the Earth's most important latitude. Now, let's focus on one specific latitude that deserves special attention. That is the equator. The equator is not just any latitude, it is the most important one, and understanding why will help you grasp the significance of the entire latitude system. What then is the equator? The equator, with a value of 0 degree, is the longest and most important line of latitude on Earth. Let me highlight its key characteristics. Location. The equator runs around the middle of the Earth, encircling the planet at its widest point. In terms of degrees, the equator is designated as 0 degree. This is the reference point from which all other latitudes are measured. Every other latitude is defined by its distance north or south of the equator. Hemispheres. Hemi is half. The equator divides Earth into two halves or hemispheres, which are the northern hemisphere and the southern hemisphere. Everything north of the equator is in the northern hemisphere, and everything south of it is in the southern hemisphere. Remember, Ghana, by our location, we are in the northern hemisphere. The size of the equator. The equator is the only great circle among all the latitudes, and a great circle is a circle on a sphere whose center coincides with the center of the Earth. The equator is unique because it divides the Earth into two perfectly equal parts. All other latitudes are smaller circles that do not divide the Earth equally. Then the last, distance from the poles. The equator is exactly 90 degrees away from the North Pole and the South Pole. This symmetry reflects the spherical shape of the Earth. So we ask why the equator matters. What is the essence of studying about the equator? The equator is significant for several reasons. First, it is a reference point for the entire latitude system. Without it, we will have no starting point for our measurement. Second, the equator marks the boundary between the northern and southern hemispheres, which have different seasonal patterns, weather systems, and geographical characteristics. Third, regions near the equator experience unique climatic conditions. They are typically hot and receive significant rainfall, creating the tropical ecosystem we see in places like the Amazon rainforest, Central Africa, and Southeast Asia. Okay, so understanding the equator is essential to understanding latitudes, and understanding latitude is essential to understanding geography itself. So in this diagram we see the earth drawn and some important latitudes demarcated. We are not saying that the other latitudes are not important. They are all important, but these 7 latitudes should always be at the back of your mind. Okay, so beyond the equator, there are several other latitudes that have particular geographical and climatic significance. These are the important lines of latitudes, and geographers and climatologists refer to them frequently. So let me introduce you to each of them. As I said, there are 7. So the first is the North Pole, and the value is 90 degrees north. The North Pole is the northernmost point on Earth. It is located at 90 degrees north of the equator. At the North Pole, all longitudes converge. When we get to longitudes, you appreciate that. So at the North Pole, all longitudes converge. They all meet at a single point. The North Pole is covered in ice and is one of the most extreme environments on our planet. The second important latitude is the Arctic Circle, which is 66.5 degrees north. The Arctic Circle is located at 66.5 degrees north of the equator. This latitude marks the boundary of the polar region in the northern hemisphere. North of the Arctic Circle, there are areas that experience the midnight sun in summer, where the sun does not set, and polar night in winter, where the sun does not rise. So the Arctic Circle is a critical boundary in terms of climate and ecology. Number 3, the Tropic of Cancer. The Tropic of Cancer is located at 23.5 degrees north of the equator. This latitude marks the northern boundary of the tropical zone. So at the Tropic of Cancer, the sun is directly overhead at noon during the summer solstice. That is around June 21st. This latitude passes through several countries, including Mexico, Egypt, and India. The region between the equator and the Tropic of Cancer experiences tropical or subtropical climate. The next important latitude is the equator. We have looked at it from the previous slides. It is the reference point, the dividing line between hemispheres, and the location of the most intense solar radiations on Earth. The fifth is the Tropic of Capricorn. The Tropic of Capricorn is located at 23.5 degrees south of the equator. It marks the southern boundary of the tropical zone. At the Tropic of Capricorn, the sun is directly overhead at noon during the winter solstice in the northern hemisphere, which is around December 21st. This latitude passes through Australia, Southern Africa, and South America. Take note of these countries that these important lines of latitude passes through. The last but one is the Antarctic Circle. The Antarctic Circle is located at 66.5 degrees south of the equator. This latitude marks the boundary of the polar region in the southern hemisphere. So, like the Arctic Circle, the Antarctic Circle experiences extreme seasonal variations in daytime, with midnight sun in summer and polar night in winter. So, the last important line of latitude is the South Pole. The South Pole is the southernmost point on Earth, located at 90 degrees south of the equator. So, like the North Pole, all longitudes converge at the South Pole. The South Pole is covered in ice and is part of Antarctica, one of the most inhospitable places on Earth due to extreme coldness. So we ask ourselves, having explored these lines of latitudes, why do they matter? Why should we worry ourselves studying these 7 important lines of latitudes? These 7 latitudes are not arbitrary. They have been identified because they mark important boundaries in Earth's climate system. Okay, the tropics, that is between the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, receive the most direct solar radiation and are generally hot. The temperate zones. The temperate zone marks between the tropics and the Arctic or the Antarctic Circle. They have moderate climates with distant seasons. The polar regions, that is north of the Arctic Circle and the south of the Antarctic Circle, are extremely cold. So when you understand these latitudes, it's going to help you to understand that the global climate patterns are different all over the world. Okay, as a geographer, you need to understand the climate and then its impact on man. Okay, so we're looking at this table. We have the important lines of latitudes outlined. Let me present this information in more structured format so you can see the relationship clearly. I'm going to walk you through this table that summarizes the 7 important latitudes. This table is a useful reference to that you may want to bookmark or write down for future study. So we have my latitude, degrees, hemisphere, and significance in my columns. Okay, so we start with the North Pole. As I said in the previous slide, the North Pole is the absolute northern limit. It is where all the meridians or the longitudes converge, and it is a point of extreme cold and ice. We like to travel there one day. Arctic Circle 66.5 degrees north, and is the boundary of the polar region. The Arctic Circle marks where the polar regions begins in the northern hemisphere. Beyond this line, you experience phenomena like the midnight sun and polar night. 3. The Tropic of Cancer, 23.5 degrees north, which marks the northern limit of the tropical zone. It is significant because the sun is directly overhead here at the summer solstice. Our equator, 0 degree, which divides Earth into two equal halves. So the equator serves as the reference point dividing the Earth into northern and southern hemisphere. Note that the equator is not in either hemispheres. It is a boundary between them. So you cannot tell me the equator is in the northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere. It is at the middle belt. Good. Then Tropic of Capricorn, 23.5 degrees south. And the Tropic of Capricorn marks the southern limit of the tropical zone. Here the sun is directly overhead at winter solstice. Okay. Then we go to the Antarctic Circle, 66.5 degrees south, and it marks where the polar region begins in the southern hemisphere, like the Arctic Circle. It is a boundary for extreme seasonal daylight variation. Then the last here is the South Pole, 90 degrees south, which marks the southernmost point on the Earth. So, like the North Pole, all the meridians converge here. It is a place of extreme cold and ice. Okay, so let's note some patterns in this important latitudes. As you look at this table, you notice the symmetry. The Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of Capricorn are equidistant from the equator, both at 23.5 degrees. The Arctic Circle and Antarctic circles are also equidistant from the equator, that is 66.5 degrees. That is, if you measure the distance from the equator to either Tropic of Cancer or Capricorn, the distance is the same. And if you measure the distance from either Arctic Circle or the Antarctic Circle, it has the same distance. That is the term equidistant. This symmetry reflects the spherical shape of the Earth and the way solar radiation is distributed across our beloved planet. Also, notice the degrees increase as we move away from the equator towards the pole. This is because we are measuring angular distance from the center of the Earth. Okay. Then the ninth one that I can add to this, which seems not to be on the slide, is measurement system. Latitudes are measured in degrees with subdivisions into minutes and seconds. Take note, lines of latitudes are measured in degrees, and in these degrees we have subdivisions into minutes and seconds. So 1 degree of latitude is divided into 60 minutes, and 1 minute is divided into 60 seconds. However, for our purposes, we work with degrees and decimal fractions of degrees. Okay, so why should we worry ourselves with the characteristics of these latitudes? As I've been saying, these characteristics are not arbitrary features of the latitude system. They reflect the spherical shape of the Earth and the mathematical principle underlying the coordinate system. So, understanding these characteristics will help you work with latitude effectively and understand why they function the way they do. Let's then go to the usefulness of lines of latitudes or parallels. Now that we have understood what latitudes are and how they work, let's explore why they matter. What is the practical value of latitudes? Why do geographers, navigators, climatologists, and many other professionals rely on them? Okay, so the first is calculating linear distances. One of the most important uses of latitude is calculating distances on Earth's surface. Here is how it works. 1 degree of latitude equals approximately 111 kilometers. This is a fixed relationship because latitudes are evenly spaced around the Earth. We can use this conversion factor to calculate the distance between two places that are on the same longitude line. Let me give you a concrete example. The distance from the equator to the Tropic of Cancer is 23.5 degrees. Okay, so if we multiply 23.5 degree by 111 kilometers per degree, we get 23.5 times 111, and that will give you 2608.5 kilometers. You get it? So the distance from the equator to the Tropic of Cancer is approximately 2608.5 kilometers. This is a practical application of latitudes that geographers use regularly. Get this concept well. Number 2, locating places. Latitudes combine with longitude to give the absolute location of any place on Earth. As the combination or the application of latitudes and longitude help us to give the precise or the exact location of a point on the surface of the Earth. So when you have both the latitude and longitude of a place, you can pinpoint its exact location, and this is called the geographic coordinates of a place. For example, Accra, which is the capital of Ghana, is located on approximately 5 degrees north and 0 degree west. The 5 degrees north tells us the latitude, that is 5 degrees north of the equator, and the 0 degree west tells us the longitude on the prime meridian, which we will discuss in our next lesson. So together these coordinates uniquely identify Accra's location on Earth. So try and find that of yours wherever you are, combining latitude and longitude. The third usefulness of latitude is determining seasons. And our study of the effect of the revolution of the Earth, we saw that we have 4 seasons: summer, autumn, winter, and spring. In our part of the world, that is in the Africa, or we living within the tropics, we see that we have the dry season and the rainy season. Good. So latitudes determine which season a place experiences at any given time of the year. This is because of the tilt of the Earth's axis. As Earth orbits the Sun, different latitudes receive different amounts of solar radiation at different times of year. This variation in solar radiation creates the seasons. For example, in June, the northern hemisphere is tilted towards the sun. So places in the northern hemisphere experience summer. Okay. At the same time, the southern hemisphere is tilted away from the sun. So places in the southern hemisphere experience winter. Then 6 months later, the situation reverses. The latitude at which a place is located determines the intensity and the duration of the seasons it experiences. Places near the equator experience relatively consistent temperature all year round, with wet and dry seasons rather than hot and cold seasons. Places at higher latitudes experience more dramatic seasonal variations. Okay. Then number 4, they combine with longitudes for absolute location. This seems to be like the second point. We have already mentioned this, but it is worth emphasizing. Latitudes combine with longitudes to give the absolute location of a place. This is fundamental to geography and navigation. Without this coordinate system, we would have no precise way to locate places on Earth. So, I want to expand the climatic zones we just discussed because this is one of the most important applications of latitude. Okay, so it serves like a recap. The three climatic zones, and then so the tropical zone is the hottest region on Earth. It receives the most direct solar radiation because the sun is nearly overhead throughout the year. This intense heat drives the water cycle, resulting in high rainfall and humidity. The tropical zone is home to the world's rainforests, including the Amazon in South America and the Congo rainforest in Africa. It is also home to diverse wildlife and vegetation adapted to hot, wet conditions. Then the temperate zone. It has moderate temperature and experiences for all distinct seasons: spring, winter, autumn, and summer. So this zone includes most of the world's developed countries and is home to most of the world's human population. The moderate climate makes it suitable for agriculture and human settlement. Note this zone includes forests, grassland, and some desert. And the frigid zone is the coldest region on Earth. It receives the least direct solar radiation because the sun is always low in the sky. In winter, the sun does not rise at all for extended periods, and in summer, it does not set. This extreme cold means that the polar zone is covered in ice and snow and is largely uninhabitable for humans. However, it is home to unique wildlife adapted to extreme cold, such as the polar bears, the penguins, and the seals. So, why latitudes define these zones? The reason latitude define these climatic zones is because of the angle at which the sun's rays strike the Earth's surface. So we have said, or we have looked at how near the equator the sun's rays are nearly perpendicular to Earth's surface, so they deliver maximum energy. And as we move towards the poles, the sun's rays strike Earth's surface at a more oblique angle, so they deliver less energy. This difference in solar energy input is the primary driver of climate patterns on Earth. Additionally, the tilt of Earth's axis creates seasonal variations. In the temperate zone, this tilt causes significant seasonal variation in the sun's angle and the length of daylight, creating four seasons. In the tropical zone, the seasonal variations are less pronounced, so temperatures remain relatively constant year round. In the polar zone, the seasonal variations are extreme, with months of continuous daylight in summer and continuous darkness in winter. So, understanding these climatic zones has real world implications. It helps to understand why certain crops grow in certain regions, why some areas are more densely populated than others, and how climate change might affect different parts of the world. It also helps us appreciate the diversity of the Earth's ecosystem and the adaptation of organisms to different climatic conditions. We are almost getting to the end of our lesson. So now that we have covered the content on latitudes, let's consolidate your learning with some practical assessment tasks. These tasks will help you demonstrate your understanding and apply what you have learned. So, assessment task 1, you're going to map important latitudes. So, using a word map or drawing the globe, locate and label the following: the equator or latitude 0 degree. So you draw a horizontal line around the middle of your globe or map. This is a reference point from which all other latitudes are measured. Then to the Tropic of Cancer, which is 23.5 degrees north. So you draw a horizontal line approximately 1/4 of the way from the equator to the North Pole. Then number 3, Tropic of Capricorn, 23.5 degrees south. Then number 4, the Arctic Circle or latitude 66.5 degrees south. Okay, so you draw, and then the Antarctic Circle, 66.5 degrees south. You draw the globe and carefully mark out these important lines. Then the B says color or shade the regions between these lines to visualize the different zones. So once you have drawn and labeled all the 5 latitudes, use different colors to shade the regions between them. For the color, you can shade regions. For example, shade the region between the Tropic of Cancer and the Tropic of you can shade the region between the Tropic of Cancer and Tropic of Capricorn, that is the tropical zone, in one color, such as red or orange, to represent the hot climate. Okay, then shade the regions between the tropics and the Antarctic and Arctic Circle, which is the temperate zone, in another color, such as green or yellow, to represent moderate climate. Then shade the regions north of the Arctic Circle or south of the Antarctic Circle, that is the polar region, in a third color such as blue or white to represent cold climate. I hope you get it. This visual representation will help you internalize the spatial relationship between the different climatic zones and reinforce your understanding of how latitudes divide the earth into distinct regions. So this assessment task requires you to do more than just recall information. You are applying your knowledge by creating a visual representation. You are demonstrating your understanding of the spatial relationship between latitudes and climatic zones. You are also developing your cartographic skills, which are essential in geography. As you complete this task, think about the following questions. Why are the tropics located where they are? Why do the temperate zones have moderate climates? Why are the polar zones so cold? How do these latitudes relate to the amount of solar radiation each zone receives? So, reflecting on these questions will deepen your understanding and help you see the connections between latitudes and climate. So, take your time with this assessment. Use a ruler to draw a straight line. Use colors that are distinct and easy to see. Label everything clearly. If you are drawing by hand, do your best to make it neat and organized. If you are using a digital tool, take advantage of your features available to you. So once you have completed this assessment review, then you assess yourself. So does it accurately represent the 5 important latitudes? Do the colored zones clearly show 3 climatic zones? Are all labels clear and correct? If you spot any mistake or error, then you do the necessary. So this assessment will serve as a useful study tool for future lessons and exams. Keep it safe and refer back to it as needed. So we come to the end of our lessons. Congratulations, you have completed the lesson on latitude. Let me summarize what we have covered today and point you toward what comes next. Today we explore the concept of latitudes as imaginary horizontal lines that run around the earth from west to east. Latitudes are measured in degrees from the equator to the pole, whether north or south. Latitudes are also called parallel because they run parallel to each other and never meet. There are 7 important latitudes: the North Pole, Arctic Circle, Tropic of Cancer, Equator, Tropic of Capricorn, Antarctic Circle, and South Pole. Latitudes have 9 key characteristics, including being imaginary, running west to east, being parallel to each other, and decreasing in circumference towards the poles. Latitudes are useful for calculating distance, locating places, determining seasons, demarcating climatic zones, and understanding climate and weather patterns. Latitudes divide Earth into 3 climatic zones: the tropical zone, which is hot and wet; the temperate zone, which have moderate temperatures and 4 seasons; and the polar zone, which is very cold. So let's look at some reflection questions. So before we conclude, I encourage you to reflect on the following questions. 1. Why do you think latitudes are called parallels? 2. How would you navigate? How would navigation and geography be different if we did not have the latitude system? 3. Which climatic zone do you live in? And how does that affect your location or local climate and environment? 4. Can you think of places in each of the 3 climatic zones and describe what you know about their climates? So, we are looking ahead. In our next lesson, we will explore longitudes, the vertical lines that run from North Pole to South Pole. Longitudes work together with latitudes, you have said it, to create a complete coordinate system for locating any place on Earth. You also learn how to use latitudes and longitudes together to determine precise location and calculate distances and time difference. Okay, so my final thought is that geography is the study of places and the relationship between people and the environment. So understanding latitude is a fundamental step in this journey. As you go about your daily life, think about where you are on Earth in terms of latitude. Think about how your latitude affects your climate and your seasons and your environment. This kind of geographical thinking will enrich your understanding of the world and your place in it. Thank you for joining me in this lesson. I hope you found it informative and engaging. If you have any question or need clarification on any of the concepts we covered, please reach out. I'm here to support your learning. Until next time, keep exploring and keep learning geography in your daily life. God bless you.